Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you. I know we've chatted a lot online and we're finally sitting down to have a conversation. I say face to face because we can see each other, even though our listeners can only hear our voices right now. But we met online on Instagram and started chatting because we definitely had some things in common. And I thought you would just be such a great guest because you have such a story to tell and a story to share about being diagnosed with cancer at a very early age and what you've done to take control of your life in every way you can to be healthier and do what you can do in your control, as I have done as well as a cancer survivor. And I just think it's something that we need to share with the world because I know we're not the only ones. There's a lot of men and women out there that are listening that either have gone through it or may go through it in years to come. And I think this will be really helpful for them so they don't feel so alone and they know what they can do about it to feel a little bit more in control when you get that diagnosis. You feel a lot of out of control feelings, and I think this will help them. But I wanted to start just with having you share your story. I know you've shared it a lot online, so if people are already following you, they may know this, but I would love for you just to take a minute and just share, when you were diagnosed, what you were diagnosed with, and kind of just what you were going through at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed when I was 32 years old. So that is 7 years ago. I'm actually approaching my eighth year of cancer survivorship at the end of this month. So I'm feeling very grateful and fortunate for that. Um,
Congratulations. That's
Thank
a
you.
lot. Every year is a big year. So that's
Every year
great.
counts. Yeah, I think of it that way too. And every year I learn more and more and so much. And it hopefully only provides value to my clients and to anyone that's following me. Like, we're all in it together. It's a process. And every year, you're supposed to get smarter, better, stronger, and grow. And that's the goal. When I was diagnosed at 32, I always say this that my cancer journey started about a year prior to my diagnosis. I had a lot of things happening leading up to my cancer diagnosis. I had a very large surgery. I had a benign pituitary tumor that was removed, and 6 months after that, I was diagnosed. But 6 months prior to that pituitary tumor, I lost my mom to a stage four stomach cancer. So my husband and I were newly married, and she was given 6 weeks to live. And we moved her in and we became her caregivers. And she ended up making it about 6 months. But it was really my first experience with cancer. I don't come from a long line of people that dealt with chronic illness or cancer. It doesn't run in my family. I don't have any cancer genes. I was tested. My mom didn't either. In fact, both of our cancers were considered environmental, right? So I had non Hodgkin's lymphoma. She had stomach cancer. And so taking care of her was really my first introduction to cancer. She chose not, I mean, they gave her 6 weeks to live. She chose not to do any kind of chemo or radiation. She was doing some natural things on the back end, but it was very far gone. And so there was a lot of trauma that I experienced from just being her caregiver. I really had to become the parent overnight. Um, and just seeing how illness and cancer can attack the body in different ways was honestly just terrifying, and terrifying to see, a loved one suffer and to have to be responsible really for her health. So after she passed, I was diagnosed with a pituitary tumor. And then 6 months after that, I was diagnosed with the stage two non Hodgkin's lymphoma. And, something that I like to mention, and also something that I've seen in a lot of my clients too, these big stressful events that happen almost like 2 or 5 years prior to your diagnosis, stress plays such a big piece of it. And I know I can only speak for myself. And I know for me that the stress of taking care of my mom and the PTSD experienced from seeing her suffer and pass away, and then the grief that I felt, I was not taking care of myself. I had no outlets for it. It really compounded, which felt like in my chest. And coincidentally enough, that's where my tumor resided. I found out that I had a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter tumor in my chest. It was leaning against my heart. I had four blood clots running through my left arm. And to be frank with you, I really didn't have many symptoms. I was 32. I was traveling on girls' trips and drinking and, being 32,
Living for life. Yeah.
working my butt off and building my career and just being newly married and just having, trying to kind of get through the grief that I was feeling. And which I started seeing a grief therapist about a few months before my diagnosis, which really started to help me become unstuck and became really a foundation for my mindset as I entered my own cancer journey. So after my diagnosis, I underwent chemotherapy. I did 6 rounds of chemotherapy, a very traditional chemo. I was in the hospital every round for about 5 to 6 days. I was on 6 different chemo drugs, and there was about 2 weeks in between each round. So it was hit hard. And my oncologist was she was fantastic. She was absolutely fantastic. So positive. We were on the same page with goals. And one huge thing that kept coming up when I found my cancer is me and my husband were trying to get pregnant, and I couldn't get pregnant. And that's how I found the pituitary tumor. Like my body was just too sick that it wasn't allowing this pregnancy to happen. And I remember just being so frustrated with the pregnancy journey, as most people are, right? When you're trying so hard and all we wanted was a kid. And I remember it was probably about a week before my diagnosis. I remember meditating slash praying and really like thinking to myself, I'm just going to surrender to whatever is supposed to happen next. I'm going to surrender. I'm going to relinquish control. It is what it is, and whatever's going to be is going to be. And then I found out that I had cancer, and I really obviously it turned my entire world upside down, but it also was like, gosh, am I ever going to be able to have kids? Is What's my reality? Am I going to die? It was really a really hard reality to face after just burying my mom from cancer, because the only thing I had to compare it to was her journey, which was very different than mine. But you don't know that at 32. You don't know. I didn't know anything about cancer at that point. And my health journey didn't really begin until after cancer. So it was an enormous wake up call, and it completely turned my life around in some of the best and the worst ways possible, as I'm sure every cancer survivor can, as yourself, can relate to.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. I'm just so sorry about your mom and going all through that, and then also with your own story. And like I said, I feel like as soon as I found you on Instagram, I was like, oh, like I can relate to this woman so much. And I have a very similar story, and I've shared it before, so I don't want to. This is episodes about you, so I don't want to go too much into depth, but for anyone who may not know, I am a two-time breast cancer survivor. And again, you and I both had very different types of cancers. But I also was in my early 30s when I was first diagnosed. Cancer does run in my family. I have had pretty much every single grandparent died of cancer or had cancer at some point. But interestingly enough, when I took the test to do the genes, I had no cancer gene, or, I didn't have the BRCA gene or anything like that. And they also deemed it environmental, which is interesting. So, and I had no lump. I had no symptoms. I was just about to get married. I was under a tremendous amount of stress, planning the wedding, arguing with in laws, like doing all the things that, can be stressful about planning a wedding. And when my doctor came in, so I happenstantially randomly had this tic tac size something or other. I don't even remember what it was called, on my left breast, and that's what made me go into the doctor and say, I don't think it's a lump. It was just this little hard, like I said, I compare it to a tic tac. And my doctor just said, because I was in my early 30s, like they don't even give mammograms to women our age at that point. And I thought, this is crazy. I've never had any health issues my whole life. Like this is, I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to go in, do what I have to do, and then, be on my way. And she said, well, let's just get you a mammogram just in case. Thank goodness she did, because in your early 30s, like it's just unheard of, especially without like a history and things like that. So I went in for the mammogram, and I'll remember it like it was yesterday. And this was, in 2011. So a long time ago. And I remember being in the doctor, and they were doing their mammogram and doing the testing. And right in the middle, she said, I'm going to have you hang on here for just a second. I'm going to go check on something. I'll be right back. And that's when it first hit me of, that doesn't sound right. Like my gut intuition knew something was wrong. And then she came back and said, we have to do a few more slides, a few more tests. And I said, okay. And next thing you get the testing back, they do the biopsy, it comes back, and it was a very early stage, thank goodness. And it was inside my milk duct, so it hadn't spread or anything, which was phenomenal that we caught it that early. I mean, who knows how long it had been there, but they had caught it at that point. And again, just leading up, like you talked about with the stress, is just we had such a very similar experience in that time frame. And I had my surgery a few months later, and then they had to do a second surgery to make sure the margins were cleared. And again, like you, I didn't have kids yet, so I luckily didn't have to do something like chemo. But I also was recommended to take medication and do radiation and all those things. But I said I want to wait until after I have kids before I go down that journey, because I still thought, well, I'm young and they caught it early, it's gone. I'm gonna do what I need to do. And then if I ever have to revisit this, I can. And unfortunately, I did. 7 years later, it came back. Don't know if it was a true reoccurrence or not, but it came back in the basically the same spot. Oh, it wasn't the tic tac size thing, by the way. That was benign. And they found calcifications on the right breast. That's how they found it through that mammogram. It had nothing to do with when I
Wow.
went in. Yeah, on the left side, but they just happenstantially randomly found these clusters of calcification. So I didn't have a lump, like I said. It was just these calcifications on the right breast, and again, very minuscule, but they did find it on the mammogram. So, which always
What a blessing to find that Tic Tac size
I know,
benign, whatever it was,
yeah,
that's because that sparked the whole process to find it. Like, it's so funny. I'm sure you think this too when you look back at your journey. There's so many little silver linings where you're like, oh my God, if that didn't
yeah.
happen, then this and that. And it's just so wild to kind of start putting those pieces of the puzzle together to understand like where you're at now.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, that's just like I said, I definitely found some parallels in our stories, and that's why I wanted to connect with you, because I know we're not the only ones. There's as I've gone through this journey, I've found a lot more. The first time I went through it, I was so terrified because the doctor came in and just said, "You have cancer. You got to get an MRI, radiation, surgery," and she kept listing all these things I had to do, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm dying, and I'll never have kids." And I like all those thoughts going through your head of also went through why me, like why so early, like why is this happening, and just being confused about the whole thing. Because again, I really didn't know even what I was even diagnosed with when she left the room. I just heard cancer and that was it. And of course, my experience with cancer was death. So anyway, and then when it came back, I mean, I guess I was surprised because I thought I already had gone through this journey. Like I'm done. I went through it and I'm good now, right? I mean, they got it out. And like I said, the first time, and I don't know if you experienced this or not, but the first time I went through it, I felt so broken and so dirty and so ashamed. And I didn't want to admit it to anybody. I didn't want to share it with anyone. The only people that knew were my immediate family, like my parents and siblings, my husband, and my boss, because I had to take a week off work for the surgeries. And I didn't tell anybody else. And it felt so isolating and so alone that when it came back the second time around, I said, I'm not doing it this time. I'm not going to feel this way. And I don't know if you experienced that, but did you feel a sense of isolation? I feel like now with social media and, people are more open about it, but did you tell a lot of people? Did you feel that sense of isolation, or did you reach community like I did the second time around? So people could be praying for me. People could be sending me all the positive vibes and, you know, comparing experiences. So, it felt less alone. What was that like for you when you were going through it?
Yeah, that's a really great question because it's important. And I was very similar to you. I was so, I guess, ashamed or felt like it was my fault or just felt like nobody around me could possibly understand. And this is only happening to me. And I told obviously my immediate family, my husband, my immediate family, I was working full time at a corporate job doing training and development. I told my boss because she was also one of my best friends, and I would have to go in the hospital, inpatient chemo. I had to be in the hospital. So I actually opted to work through my entire chemo journey. So I'd just be working through the hospital and hosting trainings and my chemo machines beeping and this and that. And no one knew. I had like
Wow.
25 people reporting into me. I was doing daily one-on-one check-ins. I had the wig. I mean, nobody knew. And I didn't want anyone to know. But I know that I didn't want anyone to know because I think it meant that I had to admit it to myself. A, and I'm very good. I was a type A perfectionist, and I'm very good at putting my head down, getting through round to round, and just working my ass off to get to a certain point, right? And this experience was very different because it was mental and emotional. So that doesn't really work with cancer. But I didn't want to talk about it with anyone. I didn't want to explain it. A really big thing for me was I didn't want the looks of sympathy, or that I was, when you tell people that you have cancer, you're battling cancer, it's like, oh, and they tilt the head and they give you the look. And there's a look in their eye where you are all of a sudden a victim, people feel bad for you, etc. That was not my identity in any way. I didn't want the attention from it. I was never going to be the I have cancer kind of like it just wasn't who I was. It was something where I was like, I want to get through this in private. I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm going to keep it to myself and forge through. And when I feel comfortable enough, I will talk about it. And even I just talked about this on social media too. Even when I like rang the bell and finished my last round, and they removed my pick line, my dad and my in-laws, everyone's trying to like take pictures of me and everything. Like, no, I do not want to remember this. I don't ever want to talk about cancer again for the rest of my life. I don't want to hear the word cancer. I'm done. Like, this chapter is over and I don't ever want to think about it. Really funny how that happened, since I'm like, all about cancer now.
Right.
But at that time, that was the mentality, and that's exactly what I needed to get through this experience. And I couldn't handle, I saw how my dad and my husband were looking at me with this just incredible sadness, and I just couldn't handle seeing that from every single person in my world. So I played my cards very close to my chest. And I don't think I felt isolated or alone in it. I mean, social media was definitely not what it is now, 7 years ago. So I didn't really feel like there was community, but I really felt like I had to go internal because, and especially because my dad and my husband were so, oh my gosh, they were so doting on me and took care of me and so lovely. But I also saw in their faces how worried and scared they were. And it was almost like I had to constantly be like, it's okay, I'm strong, I got this, don't worry about it. And it was so much energy to have to make sure everyone else was okay that it was like, I can't do this. I have to just keep it inside a little bit and like get through it. So that kind of led me personally to not processing as I was going through cancer, which I personally don't think a lot of cancer patients do. You're in it, it's impossible to mentally and emotionally process your diagnosis and everything you're going through every step of the way. I think that our heads would explode if we really did feel all of the things that we were feeling. But I think that for me personally, I didn't really start processing until cancer survivorship slash recovery. And that to me was a whole completely different journey than going through cancer. And obviously, the cancer recovery piece is a lifelong journey, it never goes away, and something that I take very seriously. But I completely relate to you in wanting to just be very quiet about it and not really want the attention around it. And again, to each their own. Some people really need the community and really love the positive support and all of that. We're all so different, so I think finding what works for you and really just staying true to yourself, because in those really dark moments of facing cancer, you have to forget about everyone and everything else and just focus on yourself. And that was a huge lesson for me to learn too.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. There was a time where I thought, I don't want this to define me. I don't want people to look at me and say, oh, she's the cancer victim or she's the cancer survivor. And even when people would, say things like, you're so strong. And I'm like, I'm not really that strong. I just have to get through this. I don't have a choice.
Don't
What
have a
choice do I
choice.
have?
Don't have a
Right?
choice.
Like you just have to do it, And I'm sure it does take some amount of strength, because if not, I mean, there is a choice that don't do treatments and you let it deteriorate your body. So I guess there is a choice to choose the strong side of it. And I know we talked about this offline before we started, but now when it came back the second time, and even now, I just feel like I have so much more to lose now. Like before, I had a fear that I might lose my own life. I mean, that did go through my head, right? But now with having children and small children, that I thought, I can't lose them. Like when I was diagnosed the second time, my son was 1 and he was still in diapers and still took naps and he needed me. And I thought, they can't lose me. Like I can't go through this. So, like you, and we're going to talk about this next of, how to take control of the things in our lives that we can control. Like I can't control if it comes back again one day. Like I really can't. But there's things I can do in my daily life, that might prevent it a little bit more, especially if it is more environmental, keeping your stress down, choosing certain beauty products, certain cleaning products, different foods to take in and to avoid. So we're going to talk about that next. But it is something I live with every single day. It's a fear and a part of my life that is just a part of me now, and it doesn't rule my life. And there's some days I'm sure I don't go without thinking about it, but a lot of the choices I make through the day, it flashes through my head because it's just a part of me now. And it's, like I said, something I live with every day. So I'd love for you to just talk about that for a minute. And then let's go into, kind of what people can do to change their lives around like you and I did, and try to avoid and or take in certain things that help us feel like we're more in control of it. But do you feel that too? Do you feel like you live with it every day, or not so much, it doesn't define, or you don't live in fear every day of, oh, this could be the next day I'm diagnosed again. But do you feel like it definitely is a part of your life now, or a part of who you are to a certain extent?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it is. It is I said, I used to say the same thing. I don't want it to define me, but there's a clear definition of before cancer and after cancer. And who I was before cancer is completely gone. And part of what is completely gone is a sense of naiveness. I never thought about chronic illness or cancer when I'm young and having fun and trying to grow my career and live my life. Like that wasn't a part of my mentality. Even after my mom, I was never scared I was going to get cancer. Maybe it just happened so quickly. But there's a clear naiveness that exists when you've never been diagnosed with cancer. So before cancer and after cancer is very different. And I think that after cancer, there's always going to be that reminder. You can't you can't undo the trauma that has occurred, but you learn to live with it and accept it and coexist with it, right? And sometimes it's okay, or not a bad thing to have those reminders, because it's motivation to stay like on a healthy life track, and not to like live in denial around it, and to just be very aware and self-aware of it. I know for me, when I finished cancer treatments, I really struggled with survivorship, especially the first 2 years. There still is a huge lack of aftercare for cancer survivors. We have no support or foundation once cancer is over. And so my body was so completely broken. I could not absorb nutrients. I couldn't digest food. I mean, it was so bad, which then led to extreme anxiety and PTSD, and really, I didn't know what to eat or what not to eat. It was this like really fearful time. And then you're kind of stuck in this fight or flight mode. I think that when we're faced with being strong and having to go through our journeys, you get into this fight or flight. We're going to get through it. There's a level of stress that helps push you through. It's your adrenaline kicking in, everything. But it's also really easy to get stuck in that and really hard to transition out of that. And so, really understanding and starting to navigate this life after cancer was what was a huge, huge shift for me. And that's when my personal health journey really began. And really understanding that we process more the further we get away from that last treatment. And the more we get more relaxed or more into that healing state, that's when we start to process. That's when our body starts to relax and things come flooding through, and anxiety happens and all these other things, right? So cancer survivorship in and of itself is such a journey, and it's different for everybody as well. For me personally, I really struggled with it, and I really thought, this is crazy. How is there no help? No one should ever have to go through this after fighting for their lives for a year, 2 years, 6 months, like whatever the case is. It felt really unfair to have no landing spot, to really recover or understand what that means to recover. Because it really is a full body experience of recovering nutritionally, physically, mentally, and emotionally. It all comes together. And how we choose to live our life after cancer is a huge part of our journey because we want to prevent a recurrence as much as possible, right? Like you said, we cannot control every single thing, but we can control certain things. And in my opinion, it really helps reduce those anxiety levels when we know that we're doing everything in our power to make the right choices. And as we were talking before, I stated that cancer recovery is a daily choice. It is something that we have to work towards every single day. And we're given choices in front of us all the time. And what we choose, how we choose to live our life, what kinds of foods that we're choosing to put in our body, what products we're buying, how much sleep we're getting. These are all things that we can control and that directly affect our body and our mind and our spirit throughout recovery. So it really does come down to those daily choices.
Absolutely. And it's so funny when you mention that. It's funny because like certain things are coming back to me during this conversation and how you're saying there was the before time and the after time. And I 100% agree with that and experience that as well. And it's funny because sometimes, like I said, this all happened right around the time I was getting married. And my husband will say to me sometimes, I feel like I didn't marry the person I thought I was going to marry. Like you're completely different than when we were dating or engaged or even just newly married before this. And I said, and I was kind of putting the pieces together and I'm thinking, well, we all age and mature. And, now that we have kids and we're parents now, so things are obviously different. But I was thinking that there was such a pivotal time in our relationship that there really was a before me who he dated and asked to marry and while we were engaged and newlyweds. And then there was the after me that completely changed her habits, completely changed her daily routine, all the things. And just a different mentality. Like I'm much more cautious now. I'm probably a little more anxious now, like, than I was before. And I do attribute a lot of that, like you said, to kind of the PTSD and trauma that I went through, with all of these changes. But as we're, getting onto the topic of what to keep in our diets, what to take out and all of that, I remember when I had first read this book after I was diagnosed the first time, and it talked about all the toxins to get rid of, chemical products in your home and, things that are in beauty products and, all of that. And I remember when I got home one night and I had this giant, kitchen trash bag, huge trash bag. And I just filled it to the brim with all the things that I had shampoos, deodorants, makeup, like just everything I could find that had these chemicals in them that were linked to cancer. And there's a lot of them. And I remember just filling that trash bag and throwing it out. And then, even back then, not really knowing where to start. I feel there's a lot more available now than there was back then. And, trying to go on EWG website and trying to find all the non-toxic products that I could then implement in my life. And I don't know if you went through something similar, but you know, I wanted to do everything I could to be as clean and healthy as possible. I changed all of our food to only organic meats and fruits and, avoiding the dozen that are, toxic dozen that, they talk about. And I've really tried to do all that. But I know you have a very specific routine that I have loved watching. There's certain things that I've implemented in my life, adding vitamin D, adding iodine, Brazil nuts, green tea, like certain things that I've had in my diet on a daily basis since my first diagnosis back in 2011. What have you added, or what are your kind of top 5 things that you have added in your daily diet or your daily routine that has been known to, let's say, somewhat help not have reoccurrence? I don't even know how to say that, but what are some of those things that you definitely have in your diet these days, to help, control some of the health in your body, in your health?
Yeah, and I think that like I said too, like every year I'm like refining it more and more as I learn and grow too. Because 7 years, it took. I commend you for getting the garbage bag out and throwing everything in. Like that's hard. That is a big shock, and it's hard to do that.
And
And
it was
so
a
for
waste of money. I felt like I wasted so much money
so
on
much
this
money
thing,
because it's so expensive. Everything is so expensive. It is, and you're just like, but
but it was worth it.
you do it out of fear, and you do it out of I'll do whatever I can to not have to go through that again, right? And so I think for me, mine was a little bit more gradual and very interesting. Yeah, that we both had these environmental cancers. For me, I started off with food, and then I started with like one. You can think about food, you can think about cleaning products, you can think about makeup, you can think about your water, air, and other environmental things, right? So really like chipping away at each category because it can be very overwhelming. And this is what I teach my clients to do too, how to chip away at this. But for me personally, with my lifestyle, with my morning routine, with my daily routine, I definitely, and it's changed. Right after cancer, I used to journal so much. That really helped me with anxiety. I used to do morning pages. It was just like my godsend. I love to journal. I still do, but definitely not as much as I did right after. But for me, like I always start my day off with hot water with lemon, and I put a little of Baja Gold salt in there for electrolytes. I stopped drinking coffee. The caffeine that I do have is green tea. I always have a cup of green tea every morning as well. It has amazing antioxidants, a lot of anti-cancer properties. I also put broccoli greens in my breakfast every single morning. Broccoli greens are absolutely fantastic for you. It's my favorite, like, cancer fighting food. It helps with detoxification. It's so much more powerful than just eating the cruciferous veggies. So whenever I can just boost my meals with that, oh my gosh, I absolutely do. Um, I always try to do probiotics with every meal as well. Not taking the supplement probiotics, which I do, but with probiotic food. So I'll throw sauerkraut on my eggs. I'll do shots of like pickle juice all the time, like right after lunch or right before. I usually try to do it on more of an empty stomach, the probiotic food. So I'll do that before lunch, or I'll do like coconut yogurt for probiotics as well. So I try to include probiotics in a couple times a day, and as well as antioxidants. Pomegranates and berries are my absolute go-to. I love kiwi, and a lot of the cruciferous veggies are my go-to, like the red cabbage, even or purple cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, arugula. Really focusing on those more non-starchy veggies and the ones that I know have great cancer fighting properties, which is the cruciferous veggie family. So those are absolutely my go-to's. And then I will say, throughout the years, I've switched. I've always kind of felt like the dirty dozen and the clean 15, right? Making sure like the organic produce. I do probably now do all organic produce just because glyphosate has, encountered every inch of, I feel like, our soil. And also, it's also very heavily related to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Granted, I was living in the city, like in downtown Chicago when I was diagnosed. I was not like on a farmland, but it just goes to show you just never know, right? So I personally choose organic, but I also changed, the quality of types of protein I was eating and really focusing on less conventional and more grass fed and organic and pasture raised to ensure that I'm getting those vitamins and minerals that are not in those conventional brands.
Right.
Another thing that has been really big for like my morning routine and just for me personally, when my mom was diagnosed with stage 4, and a functional doctor told me this too, one of my functional doctors, but she was going through this most stressful event she's ever gone through in her entire life about 2 years prior to her diagnosis. And then the same thing kind of happened to me. And so my functional med doctor kind of brought this to my attention where, she may have been very sensitive with stress. I take after her. And he's like, you might be very sensitive with stress, And so thinking about that and really understanding that for you, stress management is key because you're sensitive to it or not processing it as well, or whatever the case is. So for me, stress management is, I try to prioritize it every single day. I exercise. I also changed how I exercised after cancer because I realized a lot of the exercise that I was doing was leaving me very depleted and exhausted, and huge red flag for me where that's not helping my body. If I'm crashing after, like something's wrong. So I changed how I work out. Working out and walking, I do sprints. All of those things are big stress relievers for me. I feel so good after it. I know it helps me. It's always helped me process. But I also do a ton of deep breathing. I do it like twice a day. I think that really, I don't think, I know that it helps us get into a parasympathetic state, which is our rest and digest state. So a lot of people ask me like, how do I start to transition out of that fight or flight mode and go into more of like a healing or relaxation mode? And I really think that deep breathing is a great gateway into that because it helps our body relax. Because it's like, is it starting in the mind? Is it starting in the body? They're so interconnected. It doesn't matter. Once we can get them on the same page, that's the goal, right? So deep breathing is a big piece of that. Meditation is a huge piece of that, and just slowing down and being more present. um, I have two kids. I have two girls. I have a 5-year old and a 3-year old. So I think no matter what, I am probably more stressed out than I was prior because it's kids, right?
Good. Yeah.
Both which I had after cancer, by the way. So if there's anyone listening that needs a little sliver of hope, I had one through IVF because I did do IVF prior to chemo. And they told me that I probably wouldn't be able to have kids after chemo because I lost like over 35% of my egg supply. And
Wow.
my second daughter was natural. She just happened naturally. And so, just as a sliver of hope, you just never know. So keep going out there. But having kids and all of that really, like for me, I kind of live by my schedule, where I can put in many things into my schedule to help me get my breaks and really handle stress in a different way. I know when I'm not handling stress well, like I can see it come up and everything like that. So when I talk about like cancer recovery as a daily choice, I really think of those moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, I just flew off the handle. I'm managing too much, or my stress is, or my stress is getting to be too much. I have to figure out a different way or something else to help. And the reality is that we're always changing and evolving. So are our schedules, so are our careers, so are our kids. So the same stress management techniques that I was using 7 years ago, they're not going to fit my life now. And I think sometimes we forget that as we're going through life. We think, well, I can do the two things. I've been doing them for years and it really did me wonders. Back in my 30s, I felt this way and that way. It doesn't mean that that's all you need at this time and place. So I think that like checking in with ourselves, getting quiet and checking in with ourselves and thinking, what do I need now? Am I feeling calm? Am I feeling like my stress is getting out of control? Like, really checking in and being honest and even journaling about that is so beneficial because it's a way that we can hold ourselves accountable in cancer recovery. So we can tailor those daily choices to best fit where we are at in recovery. And I also do gratitude lists every day while my water is heating up. I do a gratitude list. I think there's just incredible benefits to it. And I consider it as like a stress management technique for myself as well.
I love that. Well, obviously, as a mental health therapist, I, love all the therapeutic elements that you've brought to this. And, I do think stress management is huge. And I personally don't manage my stress well either. I've been told that by my parents as I've grown up. And now my husband, reminds me. And I remember taking a cortisol test once at the doctor at some point during my journey. And I think the highest you could get was like a 10. And I think mine was at a 10. And they're like, you were really stressed out. And it was just normal everyday stuff. I mean, obviously the cancer part was extremely stressful if that was around that time, obviously, but just and how I manage my day-to-day stress, being a mom, owning a business, doing all these things. I just finished writing my first parenting book that'll be on bookshelves next year, which I'm so excited about. But
Gosh,
it's been a huge stressor. Yeah,
congratulations.
thank you.
That's fantastic.
It is, but it's also been very stressful. So I'm very mindful of it now, like you said, because I know that it's an issue for me, and I know I can feel it in my body and in my bones when I'm stressed, and and just my hormones in general during certain times of the month. I'm very estrogen positive, and my hormones have always been a little off whack, and I know that that's not in my favor, and so I try to do things to balance my hormones. Gut health, all of those things. And like you, my why of why I work out every day is because my doctors have been telling me for over 10 years, exercise, exercise, exercise. It's such a great way to prevent reoccurrence, that we
Especially
can
with
control.
breast cancer. It's
Yes,
honestly one of the best free things that we can do to help prevent a reoccurrence and for just for longevity, for brain health.
absolutely.
I mean, there's so many things connected to it. But
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. I think that it's one of the best tools that you can do for prevention.
Absolutely huge. Even just taking a walk around the block. I mean, you don't have to join a gym. I mean, whatever you can do. And there's been times and seasons in my life, even over the last year, especially while I was writing, I'm sitting at my desk for days on end and I didn't work out that day. And I felt so guilty about it because I'm like, this is the one thing I need to do to, but working out every day. And then also a big one for me is drinking less alcohol. I mean, before, when I was a bachelorette and I was in, dating and all the things, like you live your life. You're a young, gal in the city. But now, I might have one glass of wine a month or something like that, just on a very special occasion if I'm going out with friends for a special party or on a special date with my husband or an anniversary or something. But I've severely limited that too. And those were the two things, remember, all of my doctors, my surgeon and my oncologist, said, to do to try and help prevent reoccurrence. In addition to, like you said, all the other things with the food and the stress relief and things like that. So, but we're here and we have our stories to share, and hopefully it'll reach other men and women out there that, like I said, either have gone through it or are going through it currently or might be diagnosed in years to come, and they can remember this episode and say, okay, there are things that you can do. And even if it's, just for your body and just to, like you said, be in the best health possible, and also to prevent it from happening and preventing reoccurrence is very powerful. But share with us where everyone can find you to get more information and maybe even possibly able to work with you, or just if you could share that with us, that'd be great.
Of course. So I'm on Instagram at revival.health.wellness, and you can reach me on there. You can also visit my website, revivalhealthwellness.com. There's a ton of links on there on how you can work with me. It has a little bit more about my story and really about my cancer recovery coaching program that I really help cancer survivors and preventers make these changes that we've been talking about today, with the food, with mind, with the body, stress management, transitioning out of cleaning products and changing over, things in your environment to help prevent. So all of that information is on my website as well. But yeah, feel free to reach out.
Wonderful. And I'll link everything in the podcast notes. So if you're listening and you want to find her really quickly, we'll have the links in the podcast notes as well. So thank you again so much for being here today and sharing your story. And I hope and I know that there will be lots of people that glean from, our experiences to help them in their journey along the way too. So thank you again. We appreciate you
Yeah,
being here.
thank you. Thanks for sharing and spreading the word. I appreciate it.